Seen from any angle, the coffin is one seriously ugly pile of stones. A grim, dusty box, squatting at the outer edge of 1,000 acres of dirt-blown semi-industrial scrub, 3 hours west of Sydney. It's a Darwin oven in summer and a Canberra fridge in winter. The coffin is 100 years old, and my brother Solo keeps telling me, no contest, bro. The toughest jail in Australia. Although exactly how Solo would know this is a bit of a mystery, since the big blowhard's never been within an hour of the place. The official name is the New South Wales Deep Cut Correctional Centre, but just about everyone calls it the coffin because, they say, once you go in, you stay in. It's a maximum security facility, holding the worst criminals in the country. Terrorists, armed robbers, gangsters, cold-eyed killers. People too flat-out dangerous to keep anywhere else. It was built for one reason, and only one reason. To keep the wolves away from the sheep. It's where my dad lives.
Well, the first thing to point out is that this interview is taking place under duress because I'm being interviewed by my son Danny, who really should be down in Sydney, but because of the COVID crisis, we've had to, you know, like everyone else, do strange things. And one of the strange things is that he's now sitting here interviewing me. So, what was the original question again, Danny?
How is your family coping through this difficult time? What are you currently up to?
Oh, how are the family coping? I think they're coping okay, the family, as far as I can tell. I'm coping fine because life under lockdown is pretty much the same as it is for a freelancer the regular part of the year. The only thing that's different in my life is I'm not doing any school visits or festivals or things like that. The day-to-day just working at home though is exactly the same. So from my point of view, there's nothing changed. When I was growing up, I grew up in Liverpool, in England, and we were a very literate family. My parents were both teachers and both encouraged reading. And I do remember, probably maybe it's a bit, because I was maybe a bit of a nerd as a kid, I don't know. I remember being excited being taken to the library to choose books each week. I always found books exciting, and I suppose that when I'm out talking to students and talking to teachers, that's the main thing I'm trying to communicate, is that for me, I found reading and writing, but primarily reading at first, to be an exciting and fun thing to do. And that's the kind of the gospel where all us authors are preaching when we're going through schools, visits and things. So yeah, my childhood in terms of reading and writing was a very rich one. It was, you know, I liked both of those things, and so there's no accident that I became a writer later on when I was an adult. So yeah, well, reading and writing is important. Obviously, there's all the usual things that people tell children, that you have to learn to read and write because it'll be useful to you. But I think there's a danger in overstressing how useful it'll be as opposed to how enjoyable it is. So I, as a child, and even now, I found myself, I would frequently get lost in a book. One of the things I do on tour is I show a slide of a book I illustrated called Usman's Books. And Usman is a character written by Julia Donaldson, who wrote The Gruffalo. And Usman is someone who, when he reads a book, becomes totally immersed in the story. He kind of vanishes into the book. And I try and tell the audience that that's my experience of reading. And I usually ask the audience, how many of you have had that experience of finding yourself so engrossed in a book that you completely lose track of time and you become completely bound up in that world? Now, as a writer, I try and write those stories the same way. So I try and write the things that, as a reader, I would like to read. It's a very simple kind of equation. I'm not saying I get it right all the time, but that's certainly what the aim is. So in terms of the importance of reading and writing, I think it's important to add to your mental well-being. It's important to add to, obviously, to your education. You can't really judge information without being, I would say, something of an avid reader. I think writing is a different thing. That's a different skill. It's a different set of tasks, and you don't need to be a writer to be a reader. For sure, you don't need to be a writer, but you can't be a writer without being a reader. So if you've got any ambitions at all to write, you must be a reader. You cannot do it any other way. It's like trying to learn how to be a chef without any idea of the processes involved. You just can't do it. You've got to learn the basics first, and you only do that by reading. I'm currently reading a book called I, Robot by Peter Crouch. Now, many of you may not know who Peter Crouch is, but he's a fellow Penguin author in the UK and an extremely tall ex-England international soccer player. He used to play for Liverpool Football Club, which is a team from my hometown. And he's a very engaging speaker. I say speaker advisedly because the book was written along with the BBC sports writer Tom Fordyce, and I suspect Tom may have had more to do with it than Crouchy did, but it hasn't stopped my enjoyment of it at all. And the reason I'm picking out that book is not because I've selected a cool book, far from it. I think writers are often supposed to talk about cool books that they're reading. This is not a cool book. This is a kind of enjoyable book for people who like football, who like soccer, like me. So when I talk to people about the books I read, I try and be very honest about it, and I read for pleasure. I read for no reason other than pleasure. And the next book I read might be something incredibly brainy and incredibly difficult to do, but nonetheless, the book I'm reading at the moment is I, Robot by Peter Crouch. Well, there were two distinct things. The getting into illustration was very simple in a way, in that when I was a kid, I was good at drawing, and I really wanted to do something that had something to do with drawing. And in Liverpool in the 1970s, there was very little scope. We didn't know what you did with that. It was just, most people think you become an artist. And all I had was vague ideas of paintings. And then I found out you could actually do something called illustration, which was drawing pictures in books or on magazine covers or on record covers or packaging, you name it. And I thought, that sounds like a lot of fun. So I went to art school in Liverpool at first, then I did 3 years in London, and I went straight in and started becoming an illustrator. And I did pretty well as an illustrator. And I spent 10 years working solely as an illustrator. And then I kind of drifted in to writing by the side door. Being a kind of a big-headed kind of person, I thought some of the books I was illustrating were by pretty big names, and they were great, but occasionally I'd come up with that someone would ask me to illustrate a book that wasn't that great, and I would think, well, I could do better than that. How hard can it be? I thought, I'll give that a go, and it turned out to be quite hard, but I persevered with it, and gradually, bit by bit, I kind of worked my way up the food chain. I started off with very simple, funny books about soccer, about movies, about pop music. And then I kind of got asked to do some narrative fiction. I did a series called Bad Dog for Scholastic, and we did 5 of those, and they sold quite well, and they sold in the US. And then I started getting thought of as being a bit of a writer, and gradually, just step by step, and then I started writing books for adults, and I started writing screen stuff, and bit by bit it kind of went on. Favourite person to work with? I don't want to offend anybody because I work with a lot of different people. As an illustrator, I mean, there's literally hundreds, if not thousands of people I've worked with, but certainly hundreds. And there's people I've kind of worked with again and again and again, mainly in the UK, people like Tony Bradman, John Blake, who I'm working with at the moment on a series called Thimble. We've had some success with that. As a writer, I've collaborated recently in the last 5 or 6 years with James Patterson on the middle school series, which has been a lot of fun, and also on some crime fiction with Jim. And yeah, then that's been a real experience, a real good experience, I should say. And I just enjoy collaborating. I collaborate with, there's a friend of mine in the UK, Brian Viner, who is a movie critic and journalist, but we also write stuff for TV, and we did a series called Dotty, which I very much enjoyed writing, which is hopefully going to be a series on TV before too long, although the COVID virus isn't helping with that. When I'm illustrating a book, the process is, the first thing you do as a professional illustrator is you look at the deadline. So you need to know, when is this book going to be required? When am I going to have to do this work for? Usually, people who are new to the business, that's the last thing they think about. They think about what they're going to do. And I think first of all about, when do I need to do this by? And so that means I work backwards from that, and I start doing the work relating to the deadline, which sounds like a really kind of boring way of doing it. But unless you do that, you won't get any more work, because the number one rule of being an illustrator is do it to the deadline. You just can't afford to get past that deadline. So having said that, the first thing I do is read the book, identify what the character might look like. I'll probably talk to the author, certainly talk to the publishers, certainly talk to the art director, the editor, and say, well, you know, what is this character? Is it, you know, a robot, a monkey? What is it going to be? How big is it? How old is it? Is this the right level of cuteness or non-cuteness? Should it be more frightening? How active should it be? And you come up with the characters first, and then you start placing them in the story. Usually there's a layout being given to you. Occasionally, if I'm designing it myself, I can design it around images I'd like to see in the book, and that's a lot of fun. It's a lot easier doing it that way as well. So this is a question about process. I'm a slightly unusual writer, because I don't just come in and write books. I mean, I write a lot of books, but I also illustrate. So that means doing a lot of drawing. A bit of a filmmaker. I'm in media production. I'm also a graphic designer. So the things I do, there's lots of moving parts. So I don't try and think of it as, now I'm going to do writing. The writing will come as part of that deadline. So I might have a deadline for a book that is 3 months away, and I know that I'm going to have to do a certain amount of writing each week to satisfy that deadline. And if I don't do that writing, then I'm not going to meet the deadline. At the same time, there might be another project where I've got to produce 42 illustrations for a book about horses or something like that. So I'll have to work my way through those as well. At the same time, there'll be someone asking me to do, I don't know, something like this, an interview or a piece for a magazine, and you've got to build that in. So I just come into the office, and this is the office that I work in, and do whatever needs to be done that day. And if it happens to be writing, that's great. And the best times when you're writing are when you're writing and you're looking forward to going in and writing the next bit and the next bit. And you can get, not all the time, but now and again, you get into this rhythm where the writing the book writes itself. You come up with the characters, you come up with the premise, and they come up with the narrative, and away it goes. And that's brilliant when you can do that. But I don't think you can make that a process. And the one thing I would say, and I know that some people watching this might be watching it for practical tips, is that I'm not a big believer in writer's block. You just write. And that's not to say you're going to write something good. You're going to write something though. There's no real excuse, I don't think, as a pro writer, to say, I just can't think of anything. You can always write something and then throw it away, because writing is always about editing. It's about redrafting and going back over things. So I never sit down and think, oh no, how am I going to do this? If I do have that feeling, I just start writing. I know it's going to be complete tosh. I know at the end of it, I'm going to throw most of it away, if not all of it. But just writing it makes it flow. I mean, you usually find something in there, one little sentence or something that says, oh, that was pretty good. I can do something with that. And so you haven't completely wasted the day. Now that's a question that gets asked a lot at school visits and festivals, and there's no one answer. There's no answer. Usually, I'm not what you might call an artist writer, in the sense that I don't think, I've got a great idea for a book, I'll write it, I'll try and sell it to the publisher or get them to contract it. That has happened, but usually I'm in a discussion with the publisher and they say, we'd like you to work on this kind of thing, or we'd like you to work with that person. And I think, well, that sounds like an interesting job. So it's not that you are inspired by it, it's the fact that, well, it's your job. You know, I've been doing this for over 30 years and it's very much a job. It's a job I enjoy, but I approach it with that in mind. It is work. It's not really, I don't think, about being inspired. You want to write stuff that's funny or exciting or thought-provoking, and hopefully I've done all those things at various times. But I think if you set out to do something that is inspirational or conveys your own inspiration, you might stumble. So I tend to just think, let's get this done, let's get something down on paper and then refine it. Okay, so the pitch for the tell is that Rey Tanic is the main protagonist, and he's a 14-year-old boy who lives in Sydney. And he's got all the usual pressures associated with being 14. He's got, you know, relating to his peer group, he quite likes a girl that he knows called Candy. But Rey has also got an incredible external pressure, which is that he is the son of Rey Tanic, who is one of Australia's most feared criminal bosses, and who's his dad. And his dad is in jail. His dad is in Deep Cut Correctional Centre, which is loosely based on Goulburn Prison, and he's doing 10 years in there, and which is not something that Rey is very happy about. But not only that, Rey has got a problem, and the problem is his dad wants him to go into the family business. His dad wants him to become a criminal, which is quite an insane thing for a dad to want, but that's the situation. And Rey has decided he's not going to do that. He's not going to follow his dad into the family business. So he decides to tell his dad that on a visit to the prison, and he's dreading it. He's absolutely dreading it. But when he gets there, his dad doesn't seem to notice, and Rey wonders why. And very shortly after the start of the book, you find out why Rey Tanic isn't really listening to his son. And Rey becomes plunged into this kind of mad world of criminal gangs, police on one side and crooks on the other, and the press on another. And I wrote it as the idea I had was that I was going to write it as a thriller. I like reading thrillers. I mean, I read books for fun. I saw no reason why I couldn't write a thriller for grade 6, 7, 8, 9, that kind of age group, that wasn't patronising. It was exciting, it was gritty, and it was a page turner. And I went to Penguin and Penguin Random House, and I pitched that idea to them, and thankfully they said, yeah, that sounds great. And we've been working on it over the last year and a half, 2 years, and it came out yesterday. So I'm really, really proud of the tell. Myself and Danny, my son, we've been working on a whole suite of trailers and promotional videos and support material for it. There are teachers' notes on the Penguin website because there's a lot of underlying themes in there, because the artist in me says it's not just enough to be a thriller, it needs to have some kind of solid meaning underneath there. So there's a lot of themes in there, not least one of which is that Rey is an enthusiastic. He's obsessed with street art, graffiti, and him and his friends, they do street art around Sydney, which is obviously something that's illegal, but it's compared to what his dad does, it's only this bit illegal, and it gives him a way of expressing himself that he can't do at home or at school.